Rax Mendel sighed as he adjusted the thruster alignment on a worn-out cargo drone. His calloused hands, roughened by years of welding and metalwork, moved with practiced precision over the spanner. The rest of Polyvar Station, a lonely outpost perched on the edge of nowhere, was silent except for the faint hum of the oxygen recycler and the occasional creak of the aging structure settling into the moon's crust. Polyvar wasn't much to look at. A few prefab buildings, a landing pad that rarely saw traffic, and a workshop packed with scavenged parts. Rax had come here a decade ago to retire after a long career on deep space freighters. He'd planned on finding peace in the solitude, fixing up old machinery to keep his hands busy. Instead, he found that every day felt much like the last. Same moon dust, same quiet horizon, same handful of tasks to keep the lights on. He wiped his forehead and stepped outside for a breath of fresh, or at least cycled, air. The moon's pale surface stretched out before him, craggy and uneven, illuminated by a dim glow from the distant binary suns. It was then that he noticed something odd, out on the horizon, where the light barely touched the dark rock. A strange shimmer caught his eye. It wasn't a reflection from a nearby ridge, nor was it the glint of distant metal. It was faint, like a mirage, and yet it pulsed slightly as if breathing. He squinted, waiting for his vision to adjust, and the shimmering form began to resolve into something solid, something alive. Curiosity got the better of him. Rax grabbed a portable lamp and slung his old toolkit over his shoulder. He trudged across the rocky surface toward the strange light. The closer he got, the more the air seemed to hum with a faint vibration. It wasn't a sound he could place, more like the sensation of standing near a power conduit. What he found made him stop in his tracks. There, crumpled in a shallow depression, was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. Its long, sinewy body gleamed pale, as if carved from alabaster, and its scales reflected the faint starlight in a rainbow of colors. The thing was huge. Its neck and tail coiled around its body, and a pair of immense wings lay limp against the ground. One wing was badly bent, the joint jutting out at an unnatural angle. The creature's head lifted weakly as he approached. Its eyes, deep crimson and glowing faintly, locked onto his, and in that moment Rax felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Fear, sadness, and something else he couldn't quite identify. He wasn't sure if the feelings were his own or if the creature was somehow projecting them, but they stopped him in his tracks. It was unmistakably an alien dragon. Stories about them were rare, almost mythical. Tales whispered by freighter crews who had passed through the Selvar system. Albino dragons, they said, were the rarest of all. Beings of immense power, capable of traversing the void without a ship, and yet utterly fragile when wounded. Rax had never believed the stories. Until now. By the void, he muttered. The dragon didn't growl or snap. Instead, it simply watched him, its massive body heaving as it tried to breathe. Rax noticed faint burns along its side and small fragments of metal embedded in its scales. It must have been caught in some kind of explosion. His first instinct was to turn back. This wasn't his problem. He wasn't a biologist or a medic. But then he looked again at the dragon's wing, twisted and broken, and his mechanic's mind began to churn. He had seen damage like that before, not on living beings, but on machinery. Starship hulls warped by stress, struts bent out of shape by sudden impacts. He could fix those. Without quite knowing why, Rax knelt beside the dragon. He gently ran his hand along the unbroken wing, feeling the smooth, cold scales under his fingers. The creature shuddered but didn't pull away. He examined the broken wing, noting the fracture points and the torn membrane. He could feel the thing's immense warmth through its cool scales, as if heat radiated from deep within. "This is crazy," he said to himself, but his hands were already moving. He set up a small work light and opened his toolkit. From inside, He pulled a series of braces, clamps, and synthetic cabling he had salvaged over the years. It wasn't enough to fix the wing completely. He wasn't even sure if that was possible. But he could stabilize it. He used a pair of welding goggles to protect his eyes and began cutting and molding a makeshift splint. The work was slow. The dragon flinched a few times, a low rumble coming from its throat. But it didn't attack. If anything, it seemed to sense that Rax meant no harm. Hours passed as he adjusted the brace, carefully aligning the bones and securing them in place. When he was finally done, the wing was straightened and supported by a frame of metal and reinforced polymer. It was a patch job, but it would hold. Rax stepped back, exhausted but oddly satisfied. The dragon lifted its head again, crimson eyes meeting his, and this time he felt a sense of calm. He didn't understand how, but he knew it was thanking him. Before he could react, the dragon shifted. Its massive body unfurled, wings extending just slightly, testing the repair. Then, with a powerful flex of its legs, it leapt into the air. Rax shielded his face from the blast of wind and moon dust as the dragon ascended, disappearing into the dark sky. For a moment, the landscape was quiet again, and Rax stood there in the cold moonlight, unsure if what he had just experienced was real or a dream. He looked down at his empty hands, then at the space where the dragon had been. The only sign that it had ever existed was the faint shimmer of disturbed moon dust in the light of his lamp. He walked back to the station, still dazed, and by the time he closed the workshop door behind him, he had already begun to question whether any of it had actually happened. Rax Mendel didn't think much about the albino dragon in the years that followed. Out on Polivar Station, life had a way of sanding down even the strangest memories until they felt like little more than half-remembered dreams. Days bled into weeks, weeks into years, and the extraordinary encounter faded into the backdrop of his quiet, solitary life. He never spoke of it, not to the occasional drifter passing through, not to the remote traders he hailed on long-range comms, and not even to himself in the dead of night. His workshop became his entire world. Rows of neatly labeled storage bins lined the walls, packed with cables, circuit boards, fusion cartridges, and the odd alien alloy scavenged from ancient derelicts. He spent most of his time repairing old cargo drones that the nearby mining operations couldn't spare the credits to replace. Some days he'd get lucky, and a freelance prospector would come by with a malfunctioning reactor core or a thruster module on its last legs. On those days, he'd lose himself in the intricate work of dismantling and reassembling, calibrating delicate systems and soldering connections until the machines hummed back to life. When work was slow, Rax would sit on an old metal stool by the workshop's wide front door and watch the horizon. The faint light from the binary suns cast a soft glow over the rugged landscape, and the silence out there was absolute. He found a kind of peace in it. Yet sometimes when the light shifted, just so, he'd catch a flicker at the corner of his eye, an image of pale scales against the dark or the distant gleam of crimson. He'd shake his head and turn back to his tools, dismissing it as nothing more than an old man's imagination. The truth was, Rax had never fully made sense of what had happened that night. The dragon had come out of nowhere, needed his help, and then vanished into the void as suddenly as it had appeared. For a while, he'd kept wondering where it had come from, why it had been hurt, and what had happened after it flew off. But the questions led nowhere. He had no answers, no clues, and no way to track the creature. In the end, the simplest thing to do was to let the memory slip into the recesses of his mind, like a misplaced tool in a cluttered workshop. Life continued. The world outside Polivar Station grew distant to Rax. He heard only fragments of news. From the rest of the galaxy, a new trade route opening here, a distant war flaring up there. None of it mattered much. The station's old comm array only caught stray signals these days, most of them static-laden messages from passing merchant ships or automated beacons. The thought of leaving his outpost, of hopping on some freighter to see what had become of the wider galaxy, rarely crossed his mind. The idea of home had shrunk to these walls, his workbench, and the quiet expanse of rock outside, and yet every now and then something would stir in his memory. On restless nights, when the station's environmental systems clicked and whirred, Rax would dream of the dragon. The dreams were never vivid, just faint impressions of that alabaster shape moving through the shadows, a fleeting sense of crimson eyes watching him. But even those faint impressions would leave him unsettled. He'd wake up feeling like something was unfinished, though he couldn't put his finger on what. As the years rolled on, the image of the dragon became more of a ghost story than a memory. Rax figured he must have imagined the whole thing, some bizarre hallucination brought on by long shifts and too many hours breathing Polyvar's thin air. He joked with himself about it, muttering under his breath as he worked. What's next? Rax? An army of space squids needing an oil change? The absurdity of it made the memory easier to bury. The albino dragon became just another story the old mechanic no longer told. Another thread lost in the fabric of the quiet, uneventful years. And though it sometimes hovered at the edges of his thoughts, Rax convinced himself that it was nothing, just one more thing time had swept away. The stillness of Polyvar Station was shattered one quiet afternoon. Rax had been tinkering with a rusted-out thermal regulator, hunched over his workbench as he tried to coax the ancient machinery into functioning again. The workshop was filled with the sharp scent of solder and the steady buzz of a plasma torch. As he carefully aligned a stubborn circuit board, he felt the ground beneath his feet tremble. At first, he thought it might be a minor moonquake. Polyvar's surface was known for its occasional tremors, nothing dangerous, just a natural settling of the rocky crust. But this was different. The vibrations were rhythmic, deliberate, and growing stronger. Tools rattled on the shelves, and a few small containers toppled onto the floor. Rax straightened up, instinctively reaching for his toolkit before he realized he wasn't dealing with a machine malfunction. He turned toward the open bay doors, where the dim, dust-hazed light from outside poured into the workshop. The sound of the vibrations deepened, resonating in the pit of his chest. It was a sound he had never heard before. A deep, pulsing hum that seemed almost alive. Then from the horizon, a massive shadow began to grow. Rax stepped out of the workshop, his hand still clutching a wrench. The air felt heavy, charged with a faint static that prickled against his skin. He squinted, trying to make sense of the shape now blotting out the stars. It wasn't a storm, and it wasn't a ship, not any ship he'd ever seen anyway. As the shape descended, Rax felt his pulse quicken. It wasn't until it got close enough to reflect the faint light of the binary suns that he saw the white, gleaming scales. They shimmered like polished pearl, etched with faint metallic patterns that caught and refracted the light in strange ways. His breath caught. It was the dragon. A sense of disbelief flooded him. He hadn't thought about that night in years, decades even. The memory had become a haze, a half-remembered dream. And yet here it was, just as he had seen it all those years ago. No, not quite the same. The creature was larger now, its presence more commanding, its form more alien than before. The faint scars of old injuries marked its wing, but it was whole, fully healed. The dragon descended slowly, stirring up a whirlwind of moon dust as it touched down just a few dozen meters from the workshop. Its wings folded against its body with an eerie grace, and it lowered itself to the ground, its long tail coiling behind it. It was close enough now that Rax could see the intricate patterns running along its scales, patterns that almost seemed to shift when the light hit them at certain angles. Its crimson eyes locked onto him, glowing faintly in the dim light, and for a moment the years seemed to peel away. Rax was no longer an aging mechanic standing on a desolate moon. He was the man who had knelt by that broken wing, who had worked through the night to mend something he didn't understand. But now it was here, standing before him, larger than life. He didn't know what to do, didn't know what it wanted. All he could do was stare. Before he could muster a word, the dragon shifted, its long neck arched down, its head level with his. It didn't snarl or roar. Instead, it made a sound that was almost melodic, a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the air. The sound wasn't hostile, it was something else. And then it spoke, not in words he understood, not in human language. The sound was more like a series of tones and harmonics that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his mind. The meaning wasn't clear at first, but as he stood there, heart pounding, he began to get a sense of it. The dragon was communicating, and though he couldn't explain how, he understood. It spoke of a bond, a promise, a debt that had yet to be fulfilled, and it spoke of a danger. A shadow far beyond this lonely moon, something ancient and terrible that had awakened. Rax didn't know how to respond. He was a mechanic, a tinkerer. What did he have to do with ancient dangers and unfulfilled promises? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The dragon's crimson gaze never wavered, and in it he felt both urgency and trust, as though it had come back to him not just because he had helped it once, but because it believed he could help again. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of bozone. Rax took a hesitant step forward, still clutching his wrench, though he knew he wouldn't need it. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, his voice hoarse. I fix things. I'm not—" But the dragon tilted its head, and that strange melody rippled through the air once more. This time, the meaning struck him more clearly. It wasn't asking him to be anything more than he already was. It needed his skill, his hands, his ability to mend what was broken. Rax let out a long, unsteady breath. He didn't fully understand, but he knew one thing. The dragon hadn't returned by chance. It had come back for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it wasn't going to wait much longer. In the days that followed, Rax worked tirelessly. The dragon, its sheer presence still unnerving, had not left the vicinity of Polyvar Station. Instead, it remained near his workshop, as if waiting for him to understand what needed to be done. And gradually, with its help, he began to piece it together. The creature didn't speak in the conventional sense. Its communication came in waves of resonant tones and subtle gestures, each hum or tilt of its massive head conveying more than words ever could. Over time, Rax found himself able to hear meanings in its sounds. He came to understand that something vast and threatening loomed beyond the stars, a force that had the power to extinguish life across entire systems. This alien menace wasn't headed to Polyvar, not yet, but it was out there, growing stronger and coming closer. The dragon had returned not merely to thank him, but to seek his help. It was older, wiser now, and had seen more of the galaxy than Rax could fathom. And yet, for reasons Rax still couldn't quite grasp, it had come back to him, a retired mechanic on a desolate moon, to prepare. Rax's skills weren't those of a warrior. He didn't carry weapons, didn't pilot combat drones, or know anything about strategic command. But he was a master of machines, a man who could make broken things work again, and sometimes better than before. That was what the dragon needed. With a mix of alien materials, it produced from somewhere within its vast form, sleek, almost organic alloys that shimmered like liquid metal, and the old-fashioned tools Rax had spent a lifetime honing. He began to modify his aged shuttle into something entirely new. Day by day, the dragon's guidance shaped his work. He reforged the hull, strengthening it with biometal that seemed to grow more durable as it bonded with his existing components. He replaced his aging engines with propulsion units that the dragon itself seemed to have brought from far-off worlds. Units that didn't run on fuel as he understood it, but on some kind of field energy Rax could only describe as living power. The ship's old systems, once barely good enough to limp across the local sector, became something more, faster, more responsive, more durable. Yet the dragon wasn't just helping him build a better ship, it was preparing him for a journey, one that would take him far beyond the desolate reaches of Polyvar. Together, they were crafting something more than a simple vessel. They were creating a means to face the danger that the dragon's cryptic tones hinted at. Though the full scope of that threat remained unclear, Rax knew they were moving toward it. As the weeks passed, Rax's feelings toward the dragon shifted. The initial shock and intimidation he'd felt gave way to a wary respect. The creature's vast intelligence and grace reminded him that it wasn't some beast to be feared, but a being far older and more knowing than he could imagine. And though he still didn't fully understand the connection between them, he began to trust it. After all, it had trusted him first, had returned to him after all these years because it believed in what he could do. When the shuttle was finally complete, it was no longer the rickety old ship that had once been little more than a glorified escape pod. It was a sleek, gleaming vessel, its biometal hull pulsing faintly with the energy that coursed through its alien components. The dragon seemed pleased, though it didn't show emotion the way a human might. Instead, it simply regarded him with those luminous crimson eyes, offering a faint hum that Rax now recognized as approval. Standing there, gazing at his transformed ship, Rax felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. He didn't know exactly what lay ahead. He didn't fully understand the forces they would face, but he knew one thing. The dragon had come back because it needed him. It had saved him from his quiet, uneventful existence, and now he would do whatever it took to help. "Guess I don't have much choice now," he said aloud, running a hand along the shuttle's smooth, unfamiliar surface. The dragon lowered its head beside him, the sound it made more akin to a purr than a hum. With a final check of the systems, Rax climbed into the pilot's seat. As the ship's power came online, the dragon spread its wings and lifted off, hovering alongside the vessel like a silent guardian. Together, they rose into the cold, star-filled sky, leaving Polyvar Station and its dust-covered solitude far behind. Whatever awaited them, they would face it together. For the first time in years, Rax felt truly alive. "Let's see where this takes us," he murmured, gripping the controls. The ship and the dragon banked into the vastness of space, ready to confront whatever lay beyond the stars.